This is Covering the Spread, part of the FanDuel Podcast Network.
The Boston Celtics, NBA champions for 2024, taking down the Dallas Mavericks 4-1, which now clears the way for the WNBA to fully shine and take all of our basketball attention for the rest of the summer. We're going to talk some WNBA for today by talking to Aidan Cotter. We're going to talk to him about his WNBA betting process. We're talking about the futures market. Things may be tightening towards the top a tiny bit. We'll talk about the 5 games scattered across Tuesday and Wednesday night as well. This is Covering the Spread right here on the FanDuel Podcast Network and FanDuel Research. My name is Jim Sonis. I am a managing editor of digital media for FanDuel Research, joined here as mentioned by Aidan Cotter. Check him out on X at Aidan Cotter FD. You can find his work over at FanDuel Research. Aidan, happy Tuesday to you. How you doing today?
Pretty good. A little distraught after that Celtics win. Had a little bit of money on the Mavericks, but we're here. We got some WNBA to talk about, and it's a good time of the year.
Was it a I gotta hate on the Celtics kind of bet, or was it just a general belief in the Mavs being undervalued by the market?
No, I had a future from them from February, so it was more of a long shot. Tough. So it wasn't I wasn't too beat up about it, but I'm not a big Boston fan as it is. So those two things compounded, and I was rooting pretty hard for the Mavs, but you can't really deny what the Celtics showed in those 5 games.
Yeah, it was really impressive, and kind of the bummer I think there with the Celtics is if you wanted to hedge out of your Mavericks future, you weren't getting a good price to do so. Like obviously it can still be beneficial to do so regardless, but like that's tough when they're, minus 190 or whatever they were to open the series. It makes things a lot tougher on you.
Yeah. I was talking to Austin Swamus on yesterday, and he was telling me beforehand, he's like, you just got to wait for the Celtics to drop one of those 2 games at home. I was like, oh yeah, that's a good idea. Then I can hedge. And obviously did not get a chance to do that.
Window was fully closed. Even after they dropped game 4, no shot. But hey, we can try to bounce back with some WNBA. Maybe find some futures that Aidan likes there. Try to bounce back from the Mavericks. We'll talk to him about his betting process again, the futures market, and the games on Tuesday and Wednesday. But first, a reminder to make sure you're subscribed to Covering the Spread wherever you get your podcast. As Aidan mentioned, we had Austin Swaim on yesterday's show. If you want some thoughts on Game 5 between the Oilers and the Panthers, those are in yesterday's show. It is timestamped, so you can jump ahead to that part of the show to find what Austin likes for tonight's Game 5. Hopefully that series does get extended. If it does, we'll talk to Tom Vecchio about some NHL on Thursday. Again, no show tomorrow due to Juneteenth. Tom Vecchio with us Thursday, and then Dr. Ed Feng is with us on Friday to talk some Euro 2024. To get those shows as they are posted, make sure you're subscribed to Covering the Spread wherever you get your podcasts. If you like what you hear, leave us a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. You can also find this show on the FanDuel YouTube page and FanDuel TV Plus in addition to WNBA. It's Dinger Tuesday. Dingers, blasts, moonshots, whatever you call them. Everyone loves home runs, and with FanDuel's Dinger Tuesdays, you can love them even more. That's right, Dinger Tuesdays are back for another season on America's #1 sportsbook. Just bet on a player to hit a home run, and FanDuel will give you $5 in bonus bets for every home run hit during that game, as if you needed any other reason to love the long ball. Make every moment more. FanDuel, official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. Must be 21 plus and present in select states. Bonus issued is non-withdrawable bonus bets that expire 7 days after receipt. Max bonus $25 per game. Restrictions apply. See terms at sportsbook.fanduel.com. FanDuel is offering online sports wagering in Kansas under an agreement with Kansas Star Casino LLC. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER or visit FanDuel.com/RG in Colorado, Iowa, Kentucky, Michigan, New Jersey, North Carolina, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Illinois, Tennessee, Vermont, and Virginia. Call 1-800-NEXT-STEP or text NEXT STEP to 53342 in Arizona, 1-888-789-7777. Or visit ccpg.org/chat in Connecticut, 1-800-9-WITH-IT in Indiana, 1-800-522-4700. Visit ksgamblinghealth.com in Kansas, 1-877-770-STOP in Louisiana. Visit mdgamblinghealth.org in Maryland, 1-800-GAMBLER.net in West Virginia, 1-800-522-4700 in Wyoming. Hope is here. Visit gamblinghelplinema.org or call 800-327-5050 for 24/7 support in Massachusetts, or call 1-877-8-HOPE-NY or text HOPE-NY in New York. Now, Aidan, we had you on during college basketball season, talk about your college basketball betting process. And I liked your process a lot because it involved looking at a lot of smart betting models and combining them as a wisdom of the crowds type approach. For the WNBA, that could be a lot different because we're not going to have Bart Torvik. We're not going to have Ken Palm, stuff like that. There are things like her hoop stats and things like that. But the public models that are available in the WNBA, a lot tougher to find. So how does your process differ when you're betting the WNBA?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of good comparisons we can draw between college basketball and the WNBA, specifically with game environments where they're both 40-minute games. And like in college basketball, the WNBA season is not very long. The regular season is only 40 games, so we're not dealing with these very, very big samples, especially with these smaller games and lower minutes. And so I think we can look at them a lot like college basketball versus the NBA, where we're drawing that out over a full 82 games. Like college basketball, I still do like to try to compare my models. So the main two we're using for WNBA is D-rating and Massey. I know her hoop stats is really good. Her hoop stats is also a paid subscription, which I'm sure is worth it.
Yes.
But for me, right off the bat, you want to be looking to see if those D-rating and Massey they're going to have any kind of big differences between the opening lines, whether a total is too short, a line is too high. I think one of the biggest things, and I was talking to this before we went on air, the WNBA market, I have never really seen anything like it of how liquid it is from game to day. And even from when a line opens to where it closes. And FanDuel has been really good this year, I think, about getting these markets up really quickly. But they just change so much throughout the day. And I'm not exactly sure why that is, whether that is a lot more public money coming in with the rise in popularity. But it is just wild to see how much these can shift. And so I think being diligent is one of my biggest things, where in some of the other sports, you have these lines that don't shift a lot through the week. So you have time to mull it over and think about your process and think about whether you want to fire on this value. For the WNBA, what I've found is if you see something you like and you see something that is showing value, you just need to get on it, because you're going to look back in an hour or two before the game starts, and that's going to have moved 2 or 3 points. And you still want to be, looking for responsible wagers and looking for where you can find value, but trying to get that right away when it opens the day before, I think, is where you can really get an edge on these type of markets.
And I think that's important too, because a lot of people, I think, who are betting the WNBA now, people who have not bet it before are betting it because they're watching these games. If you're watching a game, you may be more inclined to put a wager on it. And if you're watching a game, that means you're betting into the markets that have already been bet into quite a bit. So when you're looking at these markets to be close to tip, are you noticing that they're pretty tough to find value at that point in the day because things have moved so much from when things open to where they are at that point?
Yeah, absolutely. And you see that mostly, I think, with overs is the biggest thing that I'll see. Especially even we'll do WNBA pieces in the morning and have those go out, and I'll go and check the lines right before the game starts. And I'm like, okay, well, Caitlin Clark's points prop has gone up 2 points since I wrote that up this morning. I would no longer put that in. Right. So it's tough. You want to try to get that in as quickly as possible, I think, especially early in the morning before we get that public and sharp money coming in.
Right. And I think the other way to view that is be selective. If you are someone who, again, you're trying to have some fun, some entertainment out there, if you are betting these games because you're about to watch them, which means you're betting into the most efficient markets, be picky. Don't be putting a lot of wagers in there because you want to be selective, because there are fewer markets that'll be inefficient. So I think being picky is another way to circumvent that. Obviously, we prefer to get our wagers in right away, right as things are posted. Like you said, that's the best way to play things. But if you can't do that, if you're not that able to plan that far ahead, be selective if you're betting into these pre-game markets right before tip occurs. I also want to talk to you, Aidan, about the top of the league, because it's been known since basically last offseason that the Aces and the Liberty are the top 2 teams in the WNBA, and it's played out pretty much as such. But we've seen a bit of a leveling towards the top of the championship markets, because right now we've got the Aces at plus 160 at FanDuel Sportsbook, Liberty plus 190. So it seems like the gap between them and the pack is tightening a bit. Do you think that the Aces and the Liberty will eventually, flex their muscle and pull away, or is the increased parity / competition here legit in your eyes?
Yeah, it's interesting because if you look at the standings, the Liberty have been excellent. I think they're 14-2, 13-2, have one of the best net ratings in the league, and they have very much looked the part of a defending runner-up, and you cannot say the same thing about the Aces. I mean, I don't think anyone on that team would say that this has been a successful season so far. They're only 6-6. They already have as many losses now as they did entire regular season last year. And they're one loss away from hitting their preseason over-under for wins, which is just kind of wild for a team that's won 2 straight championships. I think you have to drop them down a peg relative to what we thought they were going to be, this dominant force coming into the season. But I don't think we can sleep on them too much.
Right.
I mean, they're still 3rd in offensive rating. A'ja Wilson is having an MVP season. She's the runaway favorite. She's already like minus 195 to win MVP. The other 2 big guards, Jackie Young and Kelsey Plum, have been really good. The defense has been kind of rough, but I think part of that is we kind of underestimated. They lost Candace Parker, who retired over the offseason. And not that she was one of their main contributors last year, but when you have someone with as much experience and that kind of leadership, I think that takes a bigger toll than what we can kind of quantify in data. But I think the biggest thing is Chelsea Gray, who's their point guard, still hasn't played this season. I don't think I really need to explain how impactful it is to lose your point guard and not have that for a good chunk of the season. But she's coming off a year where this is her best year by wins shared in 2023. And so I think we can attribute a lot of their rocky start to her not being out there. She has dressed the last 2 games, and it looks like there's a chance she could play tomorrow. And it seems like her debut will be coming shortly regardless. It is tough for me to want to wager on a team shorter than plus 200 to win a title so far in advance, just because so much can happen over the next 2 months. But as soon as Chelsea Gray debuts, I don't think we're going to get a shorter line than what we have for the Aces to win right now. So I still do feel like that we are getting pretty good value there. I do think if we have to take those next 3 teams, the Sun, the Lynx, and the Storm, seriously, just based by the odds and how they've played this year, I think we have a pretty clear like top 5 teams that are pretty comfortably what I would say like title contenders. Obviously, like you said, the Aces and Liberty are up at top. Between them, I think the Lynx would probably have the best shot of making a run into the playoffs. But again, kind of going back to where I think the Aces are going to start to shorten and see them get back to being the prohibitive favorites. I don't think this is the time where I would want to be wagering on the Lynx, just because they have had such a hot start. And now you see they're down to plus 700, and the Aces have been so disappointing. I think we're getting both of those teams on kind of opposite ends of the spectrum. So I'd probably wait if you want to fire on the Lynx, because I do believe in this team. I think they are a really good, well-rounded unit once we get into the playoffs. But I think I would wait until we see the Aces start to pick it up to see if we can get a little bit higher number on that championship odds.
It does sound like Gray is on the verge of making her debut, at least based on what Becky Hammond has said. So kind of as you alluded to, she's dressing, she's close to being back. Plus 160 is the number right now on the Aces. Do you think this is a similar situation as we've seen in the WNBA or in the NBA, where a team has a lot of success in the postseason and they kind of know that the regular season is not really the time where they need to push full out? They can kind of conserve themselves, especially for like an Olympic year where some of their players will be heading off the Olympics and stuff like that. Is there any sort of that with the Aces where they can kind of go 75% throttle right now in order to be fresh for the postseason? Or do you think the loss of Parker and others is enough to downgrade them as much as they've been so far?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there is definitely an element of that, especially with Becky Hammond coming from the NBA and we've seen her talk about it in those interviews where she doesn't seem as concerned about the wins and losses, but what are we doing defensively? What are the specific things that we're getting better at? So I think for sure there's a little bit of coasting maybe in the regular season.
Okay. I think that makes a lot of sense. So potentially now it's time to buy the Aces and keep tabs in the Lynx. Don't buy right now, but keep monitoring and potentially to buy in them later on. Couple of games coming up on Tuesday night, Aidan. We got the Sparks and the Sun, followed by the Liberty and the Mercury. Let's begin things here by talking about the team level markets like money line, spreads, and stuff like that. Which bets stand out to you for Tuesday night?
Yeah, right off the bat, when I see the Sun hosting one of these bottom of the standings teams like the Sparks, I think you can always look towards the under there. This was something I had mentioned before we got on. When I had initially started getting into this one, I think the total was up at 156 last night. And so we've now seen it drop to 154. I still think that I can get on board with that. trends wise, the Suns have been pretty 50-50 with over-unders. We've seen a little over half of the Sparks games go under. So we have a little bit of this trends on our side. And 154 is about as low as you're going to see for WNBA game. But the Sun are just so uniquely built for these unders, especially when they're playing bad teams. They have the top defensive rating in the WNBA by a pretty significant margin. They play at the slowest pace in the league by a pretty significant margin. And so when you see a team who has had as much success as they have, you see them dictating the pace. You see them really defending these, just suffocating these basement dwelling teams. And the Sparks just, I don't think, have much that they can do on offense. They have the second worst offensive rating. They don't really have super strong guard play. Their strength is mainly through their forwards, which is an area that Connecticut tends to defend really well. And when you combine like their strong defense and this slow pace, plus they're at home where you have the Sparks traveling across the country to play in Mohegan Sun, it's just a bad recipe for them. We've already seen the Sun hold 4 teams under 70 points and 3 teams under 60 points, which is just absolutely crazy. They held the Mercury to 47 points a few weeks back. What they're doing on the defensive end is just crazy. And I just don't think the Sparks really have the volume or the efficiency from 3 to try to be an outlier here. And they don't play at a particularly fast pace either. So I think despite the low total, I do like this under 155 in this game. The only thing we're really having to worry about is Connecticut putting on the points against the Sparks. And while their offense is good, because they play at that slow pace, they're not putting up these huge point totals. They've only gone over 90 points once. That was in the first game of the season. And the Sparks have enough size underneath where I think the Sun won't be able to have a total field day in the paint. So I think we're getting enough there with the Sparks defense, and we know we're going to get it from the Sun defense, where I do like the under in this game.
That's a 154, as you mentioned right now. Under is minus 108. And we've seen some movement towards the under already, as you mentioned. At what point do you back off and say, okay, this is no longer a value to me? Like 153, how much further can it go down before you say, I'm good, count me out?
Yeah, I think once we're getting to like 153, once we get lower than that, that is where I kind of want to back away. But I still think at this 154, we're looking pretty.
All righty. That is for the Sparks and the Sun game. Any player props stand out to you across Tuesday night, Aidan?
Yeah, so unlike the Sparks Sun game, this Liberty Mercury game actually should have a good amount of scoring. I think the total's up to 170 now. And we have 2 teams who can really get it done on the offensive end of the floor. We know the Liberty have one of the best offenses in the WNBA, and it helps that they're playing against a team like Phoenix, who likes to push the pace, even with Brittany Griner back. They're a top 4 pace team. And so we're getting a little bit more offensive action for the Liberty, a few more possessions. And so that's where I'm looking to target props. The one I've keyed in on tonight is Benijah Laney Hamilton for the Liberty, over 19.5 points, rebounds, and assists. So for the season, Laney Hamilton, she's averaging just a little over 19.5 points, rebounds, and assists. And so that's right in with tonight's line. But she's actually gone over it in 10 of 14 games. So when she's done it pretty consistently. And when she hasn't hit this, she's done it pretty dramatically. So I think that's why we see this discounted line. But I think the biggest thing is these last 4 games, the Liberty have been without their point guard, Courtney Vandersloot, and it does not look like she's going to play tonight. She has some personal stuff going on. And in those last 4 games, Laney Hamilton has gone over 19.5 points, rebounds, assists, all 4 games. She's averaging 22.5, and she's up to 35 minutes a game over that span. What I like about this angle is that she should have a ton of chances to score and rack up assists in this high paced game without their point guard around. We've also seen that she's a strong enough rebounder where she can get over this line even when her own offense and her own shot isn't falling. I think it was 2 games back. She only scored 5 points. She only took 1 field goal attempt, and she still got the 21 points, rebounds, and assists because she had 10 rebounds and 6 assists. Like, being able to contribute across the floor in what's going to be a high-paced game, I think is a pretty nice line. And I like that we're getting these minus 108 odds. But again, like I said, if you're listening to this later in the day, this might have moved up. I think I still would play this to 20.5, but once you're getting above that, I think that's where we start to stay away.
And it could be a situation where if Vandersloot is ruled out, then we could see the movement more towards the over then as well for Laney Hamilton. So that's for Benijah Laney Hamilton. PRA bet over 19.5 minus 108 right now at FanDuel Sportsbook. That is for the Liberty and Mercury game tonight. 3 games on the slate for tomorrow as well, including the Mystics and the Fever. Not exactly the most high-profile matchup from a WNBA strength perspective, but probably a lot of eyes there regardless. So looking at Wednesday's game, where are you seeing value there?
Yeah, so FanDuel already has props and standard, and obviously your standard market up for this Mystics Fever game. And again, we could see a lot of movement between now and tomorrow when the game actually takes place, especially because it is the Fever, and we know how popular they are. But I still think that this is a nice spot where we can get on a prop early. So we saw these teams play earlier this month, and the Fever won 85-83. So tight game. I think they're only favored by 5 in this game tonight, which is I think pretty fair. But the big thing from that first matchup was that everyone's favorite, Caitlin Clark, she had 30 points, tied her career high. And that's a points market where I'm looking to come back to tonight. CC has kind of had a up and down start to her professional career, as I think most rookie guards in the WNBA tend to have, because it's such a physical league. The adjustment can be a little tougher than for forwards, but I mean, she's still averaging over 16 points per game. We've seen her hit 30 twice. Right now, her points prop is at 17.5. And then she's gone over that 17.5 in 7 of 15 games. So it's not like this is uncharted territory for her. And especially compared to the beginning of the season, her points prop were up to 20, 21, even in the first game of the season against really good defenses. And now we've seen that kind of come back to earth as people have gotten a little more sharper and picked up on maybe her not scoring as much as people expected. But she's coming off a 23-point game against the Sky, and we've started to see her look a little more comfortable and kind of play with a little more of that swagger that she showed at Iowa, where she's hitting these long threes. She's putting up 3, 4, 5 threes in a game. And as fun as she is, we do have to be careful betting her props because, especially with a team like the Fever, these lines can move quickly and pretty dramatically. So more so than any other team, I'm really looking to lock this in as soon as possible. Like I said, I would play this up to 18.5. I think you get any higher than that, you're still getting a little scary. But you look at CC, she's already top 15 league wide in usage rate. We've seen her really show out against the softer defenses in the league, like when she played the Mystics. Her other 30-point game came against the Sparks, who we already talked about. She just had a big game against the Sky. And it feels like every game she's just getting a little more comfortable. And with the Fever starting to look a bit better, they've rattled off 2 straight home wins. Now they're back at home against one of the worst teams in the WNBA and the Mystics. I think this is a nice spot to have her go over 17.5. If you wanted to play this with the Fever, I had them at 4.5 when I first wrote this up, and I think they've already moved to 5.
Yeah, back to 4.5 again. So you're good.
Okay, back to 4.5. I think that correlates pretty well, and getting that plus 187 is. We saw the first game where CC had this monster game, and they only won by 2, but they've started to play better since then. The Mystics have had all these injuries, and they haven't played as well. So I think combining those two is definitely pretty intriguing at that plus 187, just knowing how well those two lines correlate.
And again, those two markets, the Fever minus 4.5, Caitlin Clark over 17.5 points. That is minus 122 individually. Now, I'm not as familiar with WNBA markets because I've been focused on some other stuff so far, but I wanted to ask you, do we often see alternate market point props? I guess we have it right here already at FanDuel Sportsbook. Clark is 5-1 to get 25 plus points. And I think that for her specifically, it might be a situation where you could look into alternate markets and kind of buy into the volatility and exploit the volatility, take advantage of that, because she's taking a lot of threes. Her most recent game, 7 threes, 6, 5, 13, 7 attempts. And that leads to a volatile scoring output where you can get games where she's in single digits, but you can also get her up to 30 like she had in that first Mystics game. Do you consider alt markets for Clark given the way that she scores, or do you want to go at the baseline to give yourself a lot more flexibility in case maybe the shots aren't quite falling the way you want them to that night?
Yeah, absolutely. Especially when you're doing such high volume scorers like she is, where she's going to keep taking shots regardless of the outcome of the game. She is definitely the type of person where I'm comfortable laddering these, where I'm taking the 17.5 as my bigger wager, but then I'm also sprinkling a little bit on the 20 and the 25 especially given we already saw her score 30 points on the Mystics just 2 weeks ago. And knowing that they don't have a very good defense and they're at home, I think that's definitely something we can explore.
Okay, so do so early, as Aidan mentioned, given that these markets tend to get a lot of attention, but potentially interest in a parlay, a same game parlay of the Caitlin Clark points over 17.5 and the Fever -4.5, but also maybe some interest in Clark alternate markets because of the way she scores her points. That is all that we have here for today on Covering the Spread, but Aidan, want to give you a big thank you for joining me for today. Appreciate it as always. Enjoy the WNBA the next couple of nights. Hopefully a good bounce back from the NBA Finals. We'll talk to you again soon.
Awesome, Jim. Thanks for having me on. Appreciate it.
You can find Aidan on X at Aidan Cotter FD. I am on Twitter X at Jim Sonis. You can also find FanDuel Research on X at FanDuel Research. Again, no show for tomorrow due to Juneteenth. Back with you on Thursday with Tom Vecchio talking either Stanley Cup Finals or we'll talk some MLB futures with Tom there. This has been Covering the Spread right here on the FanDuel Podcast Network.